folks. Thanks for joining us on the community chat. We've got some new faces here coming in to talk about as we're moving out of year 2 into year 3 for AR, looking backwards on what we've done right, looking forwards, trying to get some information from you all about what kind of resources you need and would be useful as we move forward into the future. So everyone probably knows me if they're on this channel or interested in listening to this particular video. Let's hear a little bit about who is here chatting with us today and where you're from. Michael, if you wouldn't mind going first, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. My name is Michael Coffey. I am based in Denver, Colorado. I am a artist and a researcher who is focused on regenerative culture and how to apply that in practice. I do currently a lot of my work is focused on ways of building community in cities, particularly among millennials, Gen Z, and other working professionals around that age range. And I'm also very much into sustainable food systems as well. And I like to link those two together through working with food and community and that sort of thing there. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. And how valuable to have someone doing that kind of work in Denver, an area with such important resilience potential. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Jean, can we hear from you for a second?
Sure, I'm Gene Griffith. I live in Gold Beach, Oregon. I'm passionate about permaculture. That's what brought me to Oregon and where I'm at. I like the idea of low resource usage and being and regenerative as much as I can be and try to encourage that. So I tried to create here a little eco village where I have a small apartment house with on a quarter acre over 300 plants. And I just try to do what I can to be an example for other people to let them know you can grow food. It's very easy to do. You don't need a lot of space to do it. And hopefully encourage people to see the way as I've seen, so to speak. My background's engineering. I did electromechanical engineering. I was an automation engineer for 20 years of my career. And so I always was solving problems with engineering, and now I'm letting nature solve the problems more. And that's the way I kind of look at it.
I love that. I love that mindset. And it's always exciting to connect with other people who are doing. There are so many people who are interested in getting started with these food systems. I think people find it to be hard to take the first step. Meeting more people, even through a screen, who are doing the work, particularly on small property, quarter acre property, that's awesome to be able to share what's possible. Thanks so much for joining us. We have Mike Burns here. He is having some trouble with the AV. Mike, if you want to let us know where you're at, if you want to write a little intro, I'll read it for you. Otherwise, we'll get rolling. So I'm excited moving into my 3rd year of work with AR. I do a lot of caretaking work. I have not had an opportunity to work on this project full time the last 2 years because I have young children that I'm looking after. So as we move into year 3, I'm looking forward to having more working hours, more opportunity to network within like conference type community, like professional academic community. I would also have more opportunity to do more like general public facing outreach or opportunity to spend more time doing like very researched quality videos. So getting a chance to talk with folks about what is going to work for people will be very important for me. And I saw Sarah Beth flipped in for a second. Maybe she's going to come back. That would be awesome if Sarah comes in. She has done volunteer research work for us here on the channel, help us get some really high quality information. So as I think about moving forward, I wonder if you all would like to share some of your like needs and vision, or if I should talk a little bit more about holistically what kind of reach we've had over the last 2 years and just the general spectrum of stuff we've done that's not on the channel as well. Because American Resiliency is a nonprofit and has a variety of non-YouTube activities. What do you all think?
I'd like to hear more about what you've been up to first, so that I know how to calibrate my answer to your question there.
All right. So I'll give a little bit more information. Oh, in this 2nd year, especially, I've been able to do a lot more outreach work where I go to community festivals. You are here. Nice to see you again. Thank you for coming. I've been able to go to community festivals throughout my region, throughout Eastern Iowa, to do some on the ground outreach about key resilience issues. For many communities in the US, the first crux, the first kind of foothold we need to capture is water. In my area, groundwater awareness is extremely low, even in places where folks have pretty high basis of education. About half of people have never heard of groundwater and have no concept of what an aquifer is. So this sort of basic awareness issues are key if we're going to protect the groundwater, which is something that we need to do if we look at this precipitation outlook where there's going to be frequent summer drought across most of the country. So when I do this outreach work, I go and I do tabling and I have people build models of aquifer and I teach about the local aquifer and how we need water as we move into the future. I tie that to the climate projections and that provides people with an in and an anchor. And I found that in communities, regardless of political affiliation, this has allowed people to connect to the science, to think about climate resilience in a different way, and feel ready to take action. For me, talking about groundwater has been a good venue to start talking about soil and native plants and connect with other nonprofits in the area focused on land use and work to try to build kind of a local coalition of people who are interested in these things. And of course, there are many other people working on resilience from various angles on the ground. But in terms of groundwater education and my on the ground footprint, me and the volunteers who have been on the ground, we've hit about 7,000 people this year, which is not bad for a first year of ground operations. We also had many more talks. I've done many more talks for long format interaction with congregations and secular community groups about the local climate outlook, mostly in Iowa, but some groups in California. We've reached about 800 people with in-person long form talks where we spend about an hour, we take questions, we get to help people feel energized so that they're ready to take local action. In terms of other like significant moves, I had a formal workshop accepted at the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference. So that's a chance to network within like a professional type community. And I've been asked to give several talks about communication with the general public to various resilience and adaptation professional facing groups to try and help people who want to do this work have a more success connecting with people on the ground about, because this is a thing where everyone needs to be at the table, right? We need everyone to be taking local action so that we can move forward into the best possible future. On the YouTube channel, we just passed 100,000 views total like 3 days ago, and now it's at like 110,000. So the traffic is continuing to pick up. Most of those views are people watching long form content. The average person stays with us on the channel for at least 25 minutes. So if we can parse out the people who want to take 30 seconds to look at my giant spiders, which is fair, this is a legitimate category of people. Most people who come, they're coming to learn at least the local outlook. Many people come and they learn more. We have a good rate of return. So we're having some effective public education footprint with the nonprofit. Michael, what do you think? You think this answers the questions enough to have a jumping off point?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm curious of the sort of facilitation model that you have in terms of like, when you're going to local congregations or that sort of thing, and you're presumably setting up a presentation. From there, once you start developing an understanding among your audience about like how important, say, aquifers are, I'm curious what sort of discussions that you're having after that, and what sort of things come to mind among the audience who are just beginning to appreciate these for the first time, and might be aware of the sort of climate context from like general news media, but don't necessarily have a good grasp on it other than that the world is ending. Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And it is dependent on the sort of sociology of the area. And when I have given talks to congregational and secular groups in areas that lean more liberal, there's a definite like the world is ending vibe as a general theme. And getting people to look at detailed modeling that suggests it's worth trying to make a path forward. It's like you have to help people break through the preconceived notion, right? When I do talks in more conservative leaning areas, more rural areas, there's not so much of this like doomsday energy. The crowd tends to know a little bit less about climate. I think there's less exposure in the media. And I find that people are more able to take in the information because they don't have as many preconceived notions. And I have a lot of conversations that are very action focused that teach me information that I didn't think about before about how to keep going in that direction. Like, for example, I've talked about the need in Iowa to probably move beyond corn and soy towards table crops. As we look at the change in the national agricultural scene, we're going to be losing a lot of table crop production probably in the Southwest due to the water issues, and probably have to spread more table crop cultivation across the United States into areas where there's potential. I had these ag industry people talk to me and they're like, well, you know, there is soybean oil on your table. Soy is a table crop, and you're going to be potentially upsetting to farmers if you talk about it this way. But I think we can help you refine the message. You know, like people want to help me take the next step. And I've talked also with farmer groups who, when they hear about these changes in precipitation and the need to use more irrigation, their first concern is that we're Nebraska adjacent, and has Nebraska already taken all of our groundwater with the Ogallala, right? So people have heard some of the big negatives, but they aren't aware of how much ground is left to save. And when they find that there are reasonably intact aquifers in much of the country, they like really want to get to work. I had this great conversation with a man who runs a tiling business, who puts in tiling to help water get off the fields, right, in the spring. And he had like this lightning bulb moment where he's like, all of the tiling is going to stop recharge, except like at river sites. So what are we going to do about that? And it's like, well, there is a potential to look at engineering solutions where we can focus on recharge building points as well as tiling. You know, we have to really think about this as a big hydrological challenge. When I have worked with the more urban, often the more liberal groups, we do, of course, move into good directions. People want to know what kind of action they can take related to their area, related to their social networks there. I think that I often get more interesting, broadly applicable connections from groups that are less involved in the climate conversation, if that makes sense. You know, it helps us connect to realities in the ag industry that I know many people in the professional climate world just don't have the connection to have those conversations. So I find those to be very rich and valuable conversations. I'm going to stop monologuing now. I'm sorry if I went on too long there.
No trouble at all. I mean, that is the sort of connection with urban communities is definitely something that I have more experience in living in Denver. And that is something that I'm continually challenged by, of that it feels like I first really came to appreciate these issues through an education in permaculture. And so, my natural inclination was, to go out and have my own homestead and that sort of thing. But for practical reasons, that wasn't really, I don't know anything about that at all. And I don't really have the capital to sort of invest in learning how to do that in real time. And most of my friends and community don't either. And so, like, one of the challenges that I am constantly experiencing is that we have that sort of awareness and almost probably like an over awareness of the problems without really any sort of clear sort of forward action that does not require us to purchase property first, which I'm not sure how deep you are into and the discourse among my generation and lower generations about that. But we don't really see that as like a reasonable expectation to have property to then sort of work with that first. And so like focusing on how to like organize and how to sort of get more political momentum is always a regular concern, but we also have jobs that we need to do. We only have so much energy, and so like having that sort of organizing that political will really requires like a really sort of focused intent beforehand. And I find that when I have conversations with my friends about this, because I've had so much of an education, I can see a bit more clearly what needs to be done. But trying to explain it to them from ground zero, I often don't know where to start with that a lot of the time, because I feel the need to like, okay, this is how complex systems work first, so that you can understand why I don't think that we're all doomed. And I kind of lose them there a lot of the time. I don't know, I feel like I've been going all over the place with this, but really like the sort of point is that I feel like that trying to work with people to build that community and that base of knowledge first in a way that is like accessible to people really is the major hurdle for urban communities, just because they don't have like that referent of that they know how life cycles work in the same way that like farmers or other sort of rural workers might be more familiar with, just because of their environment that they grew up in.
There's a lot of important issues that you touch on there, and I'd like to try and unpack some of them and connect them across this group that we have here to talk today. One of them is related to issues of people under 40 and people under 30, where we have, especially in urban areas, like you live in Denver, who's going to be buying property anywhere around Denver, right? It is a very challenging market. And in many of the areas with really pretty decent resilience outlooks, the urban areas are extremely expensive. The land is extremely expensive. This is one of the many reasons why I like to direct people towards the Great Lakes region. It's still cheap because it's like sucks here, but it's going to keep sucking the same amount. So I would really advocate for it. I like it very much myself. I I think this is a real issue. The fact that many of the people who are going to be living through this have a very limited road to property acquisition. I'm going to be 40 in the spring. I feel like many of the things that helped me in my life, the merit-based scholarships, the merit-based internships, those types of opportunities, it's like the rungs have been cut off the ladder over the last 10, 15 years. I think that the conditions that people younger than me are facing are materially more challenging than many generations have faced in some time, and that they need to be seen as real. And we need to look at the math on what's happening economically in our country and take some moves from there. You talk about organizing, you talk about the challenge of educating in the face of despair. Of women my age, half of the ladies that I know didn't have children or didn't have as many children as they wanted to because of economic pressures. People shouldn't have to have even one more child than they want. But when a woman wants to have children and she feels like she can never afford it, that's also a very sad thing. That's also like a cruelty in society, right? I think that these pressures are real, and right now they're hampering our response because of a lack of organization. I think the more we can do to spread the message of where there are realistic places to get a foothold, help people get there, and help people work together, that's an important thing that we need to do. And we need to have models for the fact that you don't need 40 acres to do this kind of work. And Jean, I would love if we could get you on the floor a little bit more now, talking about that. And maybe you have some ideas for how we can help people to get inspired about small space and the kind of spaces where we could work together. You talked about eco-village type model. I'm going to let you talk for a while.
Okay. Well, I think we need to come with everybody's starting to understand the problem a little bit. Whether there's, inflation, all these problems are kind of occurring. So if we can give them solutions and that are practical solutions that they can use in their everyday life, whether they're urban or rural, I think that starts, starting people in the correct direction. So how can you function as an eco village? Well, I'm a single apartment. I mean, I have 4 apartments plus a couple of buildings, and I've only, like I said, on the quarter acre. So what I've done is I put over almost 2 dozen apple trees espaliered around my fencing. So I'm creating a living fence, so to speak. Inside of that, I have raspberries, blueberries, um, jostaberries, gooseberries, things that produce fruit as well as live in an understory. So they don't have to have. It's like a crowded little garden. So I don't have it spread out in rows. Everything is basically together. And it's funny because people don't even recognize the house anymore. It's only like maybe 50 feet from the road, but now it's covered with greenery and grapes and kiwi vines and everything. It's just it's like people drive by my house, they don't even realize it's there. And I have a little garden that's as you walk into the entrance. And when I introduce people to my place, I did welcome to my garden, because really our planet is a garden and we just need to treat it like this such. One of the things that inspires me a lot is water, and the water and what the needs that water has. And I think you're correct about that's a big challenge. In Oregon, the two challenges are fire and water. So you need to protect yourself from fire, and water is a resource that helps you prevent fire. So those two things are so key. And when you're looking for land or even a place to rent, you need to think about those two issues. How am I gonna, and am I gonna have water, and am I gonna have be able to have a resource that's gonna survive if there's a fire? So those are two key issues here. And in Gold Beach, we're surrounded by fire regularly. We only have one road in and one road out, Highway 101. So it's
Mm.
just so, I mean, I don't think people realize how dangerous that fires are going to be in the future as climate changes, trees are going to die, and, climate's going to change. So anyway, how you do this is doing resiliency, planting things that keep green, that aren't going to dry out, keeping your yard, it's sequestering carbon as much as possible. And so I think all these are important things. One of the things I do is I go and talk to different groups, or I have in the past before COVID more than I have lately. And I talk to everything from Rotary groups to any type of, climate groups I've gone and talked to about permaculture, to get people not only inspired with the ethics of it, because I think the ethics part is what makes people motivated to do any work, but actually give them techniques that help them be more resilient in their community. Things like creating ponds, creating water catchments, catching the water off of their roof. And in some states, it's hard to do that legally. Like I think Colorado, it's not your water in Colorado, but in Oregon, it's your water if you catch it and you do a useful purpose with it. Now, if it's coming from a creek or a river, then there's different rules again in Oregon. So you have to be careful about that. But I try to express to people what they can do so they can do in their own place, where they're in an apartment or whatever. You can catch water. I mean, there's so many simple ways to do this. When I start thinking about it, I mean, it's kind of a joke, but you could put a bucket in your shower. And when you're taking a shower, you collect a 5-gallon bucket and then you go out and water your plants. You can do things like catching the hot water out of your shower and put it back around your hot water tank to help recreate heat instead of lost heat that just goes down the drain. There's all kind of things you can do practically in your home, even if you're in an urban environment, to create sustainability. So I try to give people some fun things to do to let them start thinking, because your imagination is one of your most valuable resources. And the more you use your imagination, the more you get out of it. It's one of those resources that increases with use versus decreases with use. So I try to teach people about those kind of things as well. And hopefully that'll inspire them to do things themselves versus using up things. That's the first resources you want to use, are the ones that actually create more resources, like planting plants, planting things that keep on going, instead of using fossil fuels that burn up and then they're gone forever. So anyway,
I want to break down a couple of things there because that was
okay.
really awesome. First off, thank you for talking about the importance of water in preventing fire and the importance of getting those above ground water holding biological systems related to fire. the ways that we can construct resilient fire breaks. I would love to have more about that in terms of practical resources on the channel. And talking about practical resources, I also love this point you made, Jean, about how it's not just like following a model, it's about creating these habits of mind, that imagination that you talk about, a spirit of playfulness, that, that the world is a garden, that we can tend, and that it doesn't have to be a labor of drudgery, right? We can love the garden. I find that engaging in these relationships with the natural world is an intensely joyful exercise. We're up against very serious challenges over the next 20, 30 years as we look at the outlet. The outlook is very challenging. But that doesn't mean that we should be looking at a future that is denuded of joy. To the extent that our work can be a loving labor and an imaginative labor, these mindset things are very important. And they're very important to fighting the despair, Michael, that you talk about, particularly as we need to educate people under 20, where the mental health challenges that we see coming out of the under 20 population is very significant. And it's not like we can say, oh, they have so many anxiety disorders. What's wrong with them? Like, who wouldn't have an anxious outlook, right? The way that the media frames the future and the lack of resources and pathways and habits of mind that people have access to right now as we move forward. So thank you very much. I wonder if you and maybe people like you would be willing to share more on the channel as we have more of these shorts that help people looking forward. Sarah, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah.
Here, I'll give you the floor.
So as a unicorn millennial homeowner with a yard that I'm converting, I'm getting rid of all the invasives. I spent the whole summer pulling up invasive plants. And I want to replace with natives for wildlife and insect food and habitat, and also as a bonus for fruits sometimes that I could harvest. Anyway, I'd be happy to contribute to that as well.
That would be so awesome. I feel like I really enjoyed getting to see some of Kyle's yard, if any of you caught those shorts. His rainwater catchment system to me was a very inspiring, like sometimes with social media, you feel like everything you do has to be perfect to show it. Whereas there is a lot of room before perfect that is good. And I think often better because it allows for that spirit of play, the spirit of like innovation. I would love to see what's happening with you from like year zero. You're like starting at zero.
I actually have in my yard, because I'm on a mountain, I was having big problems with flash flooding coming down into the house and getting into my basement and being destructive. And some family friends did a very simple, cheap solution in the back of my yard to stop the surge from coming in that I would definitely love to show on the channel.
I want to see it now. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I can take my laptop out, actually. Hopefully the Wi-Fi signal will be still good out there in the backyard.
If you fade out, we'll see you. But this sort of like practical thing, because we've all been seeing on the news how much flooding there has been worldwide this year. In the Northeast, flooding is a huge concern, and yet the area is so rich in potential.
So as you guys can see, it's a pretty steep slope, and it was coming like torrentially, like straight down these steps, right up to my house.
Oh yeah, looks like direct to the foundation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So they put this beam.
It's just a totally tiny, low impact solution.
Yes, and now the water just comes like.
All right, Sarah, we lost you. I don't know if you can hear us, but we had you long enough to see the solution. And I think that that would make an awesome short. Anyone who is on the call now or who watches this recording, I would love to share more of what we're doing as a community. I think it's inspiring. I think it's fun. And I like seeing what other people are up to. If you want to film a short, I want to put it up. You got to have your phone be like in portrait mode. So you hold it up and down like that. And it needs to be less than a minute long. If it's more than a minute long, it won't load as a short format video. And I would have to try and edit it and turn it. And I'm very bad at that because I'm not good at a lot of things. But if you want to send me anything, if you send me a video file to ar@americanresiliency.org, I'd love to look at it and put it up there, and I'll credit you however you want. Sarah, you're back.
Sure, I got disconnected and just hopped back in, but I can definitely do that.
We got out there with you. We got out there to see the beam, and I love it that it was such like a not involved fix, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a very you could go to Home Depot and do this type fix.
Yeah, and I had so much anxiety all summer before they helped me every time that I knew it was gonna rain. And now I feel so much more protected.
A lot of people have anxiety about putting in new plants and working on a plant community, working on the permaculture approach. In the next couple of weeks, I'm hoping to do a video on the Miyawaki forest method, which is gaining some traction, which I think is an amazingly supportive approach where you put a bunch of native plants. In our case, hopefully we're going to want to use native plants that are going to be in an appropriate place in their range. We want native plants that are going to be able to handle a warming climate. And you kind of just put a ridiculous amount of them into a small area and you let them fight it out. You let them develop relationships, and that encourages their growth. Long term, it looks like that helps them get height and biomass faster because they're competing. A lot of people, they're very nervous. Sometimes these plants can be hard to find, they can be expensive, or you're just worried you're going to kill them because you've already developed an emotional relationship with them and you don't want them to die. Anything that gives encouragement that you can just have them be crazy style, that we're not shooting for like a manicured English garden look, that the plants just want a chance to live, is important to know. Oh, person joining us. Sherry, thanks for coming and sitting down with us. So if I'm going to try and pull together some threads here, let me see if I'm listening well. It seems like we want to have a general feeling that we need more content that is motivating, that helps people take the step to action, right? And I think one way we can do that is from having more community participation. And we want to keep the bar to entry really low. There's a lot of stuff that we do that is like, it can be like lame and ghetto looking or made with duct tape and still be useful and meaningful and cool. I think that that's the kind of ethic I would be interested in pushing forward. I don't know if that vibes with anyone else.
Yeah, in this particular context, I like to think of like our case selection strategy of, the shorts are quick and dirty and easy to make, and you can produce them in a lot. And, most of them don't necessarily go anywhere, but a couple of good ones draws attention to the channel, and now you have full access to the channel. And then you have the sort of case selected videos such as your longer climate breakdown videos that, once people are aware of your channel, like I personally, just like on an intellectual level, I find your videos fascinating, and I'm sure that a lot of other people do as well, but just because they are a bit longer and, are more sort of information dense and less tailored to be bright and shiny, they don't necessarily have the impact algorithmically that, other videos might. So I think it's like a nice sort of dual strategy just to have those, quick hits of, something to brighten your day, like the the prairie night video that you posted recently. A lot of people that I share that with really enjoyed that. And then also that introduces your channel more broadly to other people, so that if they want to dive deeper into the long-term breakdown and organizing and that sort of thing, that's available to them now.
I think that's cool. From a demographic perspective, I have found it very valuable to reaching younger audiences by having that short form content as well. And those younger audiences, getting them the information to help them make decisions, I think is a very crucial in terms of working to solve the problem and working to get people the information who most need the information. As we talk about the longer form videos, you all probably know I'm very excited about the fifth National Climate Assessment coming out in the fall. I've read through the draft. I was involved in draft commenting, so I'm going to be in a good position to try and get summary information out there pretty quickly once it drops in November. As we think about the first generation of state level forecasts, I think that there are some ways in which like my video skills, my video editing skills have grown. And there are some ways I've been thinking about trying to change the approach for the state level content to add more actionable information. One thing I really want to make sure to get in there is a thing that Jean mentioned, which is state by state, what can you do on a property? In a rented or purchased property, do you have water rights or not? I feel like that would be a good first thing. Like if I were gonna have at the opening of each of these videos, I thought it might be good if I can figure out how to do like an overlay, give sort of a general resilience rating, what sort of right you have for modifying the property for water. What other kinds of like big picture information should I try to get like front and center for people when we think about state level breakdown?
Well, I would think that you need to potentially get more kind of local, lower level, more detailed information sometimes than you're able to obtain from your methods right now. For instance, like pollution in certain areas that, yeah, like fracking in Pennsylvania, certain areas, local people would know, well, it's you may not be able to have a well there if you want to move to that part of the state. So, I mean, people could almost like, besides you, could be delegated possibly to try to come up with additional information to add to the message.
Mike, thanks for speaking up and thank you for that point. I think that's a really good idea is to look at the health of the groundwater, getting some more information about groundwater and about pollution. For many of the southeastern states, there's pretty good data out there where I could at least put like the state agency link and show it. What you say also about more local information, I wonder if there's a way that we could encourage add-on content, if we can encourage like in the description in the comments for people to add additional information.
Well, typically the way YouTube works in this area is people start filling in by throwing in comments, things like that, and you know, possibly that's a way. It's a little crude, but it's a possibility. It could point you to things like uncapped well kinds of maps and things like that are out there. Yeah.
I've seen when I was doing the first gen videos, there were a lot of well resources, and this is a good insight. That's something that I'll include information to for sure. What other kinds of things do you think we should get in there? Oh, Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt. And
No,
then
not
Sarah,
at all.
you'll go next.
One thing that I think would be interesting to hear is maybe some more like almost like speculative sort of fiction or like imagining of like what different locales will be like that are really data informed. That's one thing that I found has been like the most impactful of like I'll run like tabletop role-playing games similar to D&D, but like set in post-climate future America, and being able just to like build a scene and to describe some of the conflicts that are arising and how and like some solutions that like people have come to. while still keeping it a sort of living, breathing world, I found has given people more hope isn't necessarily the right word because I tend to run the stories pretty grim, but it feels more real and more actionable, and less like just a vague apocalypse in the future and more of just like, oh, okay, so this place is relatively safe, but if you go out west into Idaho now that there is a bunch of fire tornadoes out there right now, and but you have to go out there because you're a bunch of adventurers and you have to get this thing from Coeur d'Alene that like was lost back during the climate migrations. And so like I found that grounded and that sort of grounds people in a reality that is perilous for sure, but is still like livable, if that makes sense. And so like having examples of like, the sort of calm, placid sort of like Great Lakes coasts, or the big trails of people coming up from Arizona and seeking refuge in Denver or something like that, like just to give people like moving from like the higher level perspective of the climate data into like a sort of into like a more imaginative sense of like what is it going to be like to live here. I've found to be very helpful. I know that it's not as data based as like the videos that you have traditionally released, but I personally, that's honestly mostly what I use your videos for nowadays, is to like give my world building a more realistic sort of sense to it. And I found that that's hit very well with the audiences that I've been working with.
If I'm helping people to tell the stories, we need to have a sense of what we're going into, right? I think that's really cool. And you touch on something that I had been imagining on, which is that in many areas where we're looking at landscape transformation, having an idea of the landscape analog would be very valuable, particularly as we think about the Southeast, where we don't have migration pathways for a lot of the landscape analogs. Like if we think about what Florida is going to become, we're talking about really built environments. We're talking about an intense garden. To look back at Jean's metaphor, we're talking about like mega gardening if we want to be able to have a rich, full landscape, rich, full ecosystems. I think there's probably a way to square the circle in not going entirely into fiction, but doing imaginative illustration, talking about climate analogs, not just in terms of temperature, like summer high and winter low, but in terms of the precipitation change. That'll be big on shifting the landscape. Sarah, over to you. You were going to talk.
Yeah. So something I would love to learn about for myself, but I think it would be helpful for a lot of other people too, is a tutorial on how to interact with my state ag extension service.
Cool, cool. I was just talking with people in the national structure for the state ag extension service because they're interested in having their resources connect with people who are interested in resilience. I think that like resource building and like how to navigate the threads of the architecture that's out there. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that very well, but that's the sort of practical thing that can be very helpful if delivered with the right mindset. I'm also working on a video for other people on the channel who are at my stage of life where it's our turn to like sit in zoning board meetings and do other things that are very boring but are important for like moving the levers of power. So talking about that from a community perspective and how can the ag office help me with my property, that's another level that would be very good and I think broadly useful. I love my state ag extension. I met them 12 years ago when squash vine borers killed my squash and I was so upset and I didn't know what the bug was and I took a picture and I was like, what is this and how can I kill it? Got this very sympathetic email back, but sorry. Okay. So tutorials for accessing resources, specifically ag extension. Cool. I think that is very useful to include in the state level video because there are some states that have a really good extension office that's very active, and there are some where it's really not as strong as it could be, but there are other local resources. And I think that before November, when we're going to be able to start dropping from the new updated atlas, which that's what I really want, right? Is the climate projection atlas. Can do all the storytelling we need from there. Maybe I should put together like a production schedule for the order that we're going to go through the states and see if we can get people to help contribute this sort of core research so that we can be ready to go in an orderly fashion. Because like I want to get them out there, you know? Gene, I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, there's one thing that I would think would be a good resource, and that's the GIS information that might be available for each state, because that's something we use in permaculture to help people design their landscape or their, their community. And if we could have an easier access, because I'm interested in GIS, that's hard to find, So when I look at different states, so that would be something I think that would be valuable. And younger people might be more in tune with what that is, whereas older people maybe not so much. But anyway, that was one thing that had occurred to me as we're talking about the ag department and things like that, other resources that would be helpful to people so they could help figure out where they're at, what they can do in their area that they live in.
Man, people who are trying to dig in California, Oregon, and Washington, you guys have some of the tightest GIS information available. As I've looked state level, you're right, it does not translate well across the national landscape at this time. But this is the sort of thing the scientists who work on these things, if they see people talking about them, if they see that this resource is getting into people's hands, it's very motivating for them, right? The more we can do to publicize what's out there, to let people know that they are really reaching people, that they are really making a difference, it can help to create those positive feedback cycles that you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's just so important to get the information in and motivate people as well as give them the information so they can actually act. Yeah, because you can get people excited, but if they can't find the information, the plant can kind of die, so to speak. The idea can not go anywhere. So you need to hit it while the iron's hot. When they're thinking about it, give them the resources and let them take it and run with it.
They got to have something to do, and they need to not be scared if it's going to be lousy. It has to be better to do a lousy thing than to do no thing. Michael, you looked like you were going to speak there.
Yeah, I had another idea for the channel moving forward. Is I think it might be a good idea to start reaching out to other YouTube channels that are in this sort of like activist space or like climate space. Like a couple of YouTube channels that come to mind are like um Strong Towns, Climate Town, Our Changing Climate, SciShow might be another good one. I'll post the names and links to their channels in the chat. But I think that like a lot of these channels would be interested in what you have to say. And it might be worth doing a collab just to sort of bring more attention to American resiliency specifically, and then also to sort of expand the conversation to bring in other factors like Strong Towns, for example, is more about like urban development patterns. But I mean, those are very closely interconnected with climate in a lot of ways. And I think that we share a lot of goals in terms of like making like increasing the resilience of our communities with them with the sort of financial and resilience of towns large and small, and with your channel here with increasing the climate resilience of both urban and rural communities. So I think that there's a lot of good opportunities for collaboration and sort of cross-pollination of ideas and that sort of thing.
I will speak frankly that I have spent zero time investigating those sorts of potential social networks or ways to support each other, just because I've been at capacity, right? So as we're entering this third year where I'm going to have some more time, I'm going to have some more breathing room, I'm going to have more quiet working hours, the suggestions for people to connect with like that, I think is very important. I am aware of a couple of those creators. I think that across the space, across like the climate space, more access to locally relevant prediction is a real missing piece for helping to build our strength. And hopefully that's something that American Resiliency can help contribute to this larger effort, because it is a large effort. There are many tens of thousands of people who are thinking about this and doing the work every day, and hundreds of thousands of people who are starting to get curious, starting to think maybe there's something that I can do, you know, thinking of how they could contribute. And it's not sufficient for any of us to try to do just one small thing, but that is a first step, right? And it's always better to have done the thing than to have not done the thing when we're talking about building resilience. I think that we need to wrap this up, but this has been an extremely cool conversation. It's very energizing for me moving forward. And I feel like I have some action steps that I can take in terms of strengthening those information dense state level forecasts, including pollution and well information, including links to ag extension and GIS information, and showing how to navigate them, the online resources. I feel like a little tutorial for where do you click on this website designed by someone who's decided the best place to store all 80,000 pieces of content they ever made is right there, which I like. I'm a person who likes a giant block of text. What can I say? I love those websites, but I realize they are not navigable at all. I also love the idea of spending more time sharing as a community what everyone is doing. And if we can get more people who rent or more people who don't have yards to share what they're doing, I think that would be an especially motivating and important form of content. So if you're listening and you're like, I can't be part of this because I don't have property, we want you to be a part of it. And we don't care how ghetto it looks. We want to know what you're doing to build your resilience. We want you to be there. Who is there other stuff like the community networking we got to do? Is there anything I'm forgetting from our conversation here as we think about big takeaways?
Well, I just think outside of like social media networking, that engaging on like a community resilience basis with the levers of power, physically engaging, kind of spreading these ideas into your communities where they're not going to be watching YouTube very likely. So say like township government with an environmental action committee, or they have stormwater management kinds of concerns that they've got 5-year plans for and things like that. That all could, they may have some resilience ideas already, but you don't know unless you engage with them.
It is really important. You know, Mike, I've been talking with some like county board of supervisor type in my area, and it's surprising. Some folks have seen climate projection information, but many people haven't. And the more that we can get folks to try to engage with local government, to share this information, to build a relationship so that people are willing to take you seriously and show them this high consensus information, it's really important. It's really important to be active on the ground. A lot of people get their information from YouTube, and a lot of people, hopefully that's a starting point for them to jump off, look for high quality consensus information. And we try to provide that information in the videos, but it's a starting point, and it's a starting point towards getting on the ground.
But if you're engaging on the ground with those kinds of settings, be prepared to need to use the kind of diplomatic approach that you need to use for the way you go about things, because you're going to be on the front lines with polarization there.
It is very true. And I talk with folks who often are like a little concerned with some of the communities that I go out and give talks to, because they believe that this polarization means that we can't reach across the divide, or that it's going to be unsafe to do so. I've been thinking more about, the kind of trainings that I give are about helping to reach across the divide and helping to also look in the mirror and see ways that your own community may not be fully participating in the conversation, right? I wonder if maybe I should put out more of that content to help empower people to have a good approach, a community building approach where we can get more people to the table.
Having ideas like looking for your way, a foot in the door, because there's certain kinds like that. environmental action committee, for instance, where they're usually worried about things like extreme water quality and things like that, maybe. But those are the kind of people, if you're engaging with them first, maybe getting involved there, that it's different than just coming in as in a large room full of people stepping up to a microphone or something where you don't know what you're going to run into next.
That's true, and that's good strategy. As a general entry point, I find that water is always a good entry point to these systems. Water people are usually super serious, they're usually able to talk very calmly, and they're aware that water is powerful and that it's something we have to deal with, right? We're able to focus on a shared reality around the fact that water is going to mess you up if you don't have control of the situation.
And they're already part of the government. So
Yep.
It's not like just being a citizen, right?
It's a good foot in the door. I like how you put that. All right, folks, I'm going to get off now. Thanks so much for spending this time with me and having this conversation. I thought this was really cool. It was really useful for me. I hope that it was positive for you as well. And I hope to hear more from all of you in the future. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you for hosting so much. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Well, I'll keep at it. I'll talk to y'all again soon, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.
I thought that conversation was really cool. I feel very energized for year 3. I want to hear from you too. If you have stuff that you think is important that we get on the vision board as I'm thinking about what to do for year 3, please drop a comment, send me an email. I want to hear from you. Thank you everyone who was here today, and thank you everyone who gives. You know, everyone involved with American Resiliency, everyone who donates time, everyone who donates money, everyone who engages with the channel to help it grow. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here with me. I'll announce the time for the October community chat soon. I'll announce the theme for that soon. For right now, I'm going to stay here thinking about what to do for year 3, and thank you so much for thinking with me. Bye!